Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Joseph Capps coming back to you again with another episode of Dancing with the Darkness, our YouTube channel and our podcast, where we do a very unapologetic, sometimes graphic. This is the real deal podcast about living with CPTSD, and it's raw and unfiltered. And so, if you're sensitive, I'll give you a trigger warning now. Today, we're going to talk about some things such as suicidal ideation, suicide attempt, and the aftermath and the emotional turmoil that goes with that. Okay, so if you're sensitive to that, I just want to throw that trigger warning out now. We are going to be a little graphic in what we talk about, but it's honestly to make a big point about our continuing series on emotional flashbacks and how we need to, number one, psychoeducate ourselves as to what they are so that we understand what's happening to us, we understand why it's happening, all the way down to having some coping strategies to help mitigate these things and to lessen the effects that they have on us physically, mentally, and spiritually. So once again, if you're watching this channel for the first time, or if you're a return viewer or listener, please do us a favor and like and subscribe. This helps us get a little bit of a push on the algorithm, and all we're trying to do is get the word out to as many people as possible. The more people that view this or hear this, it's our only goal is to help someone. So that's really the only motivation, is we're trying to help as many people as we can. It's a very personal thing, obviously, because if you've watched previous episodes or listened, you know that I've had the lifelong battle with CPTSD myself, and all of the wonderful presents and amazing little trinkets that come with that, and the challenges. So this is a journey of not only self-healing, but it's also a journey of turning in my experiences and the wisdom I've gained through my own healing journey to do whatever I can to lessen the effects of what CPTSD is doing in your life. So any way that we can help others is why we're here. So we've been doing some videos because it's such a huge part of CPTSD in regards to emotional flashbacks. It's not one of those things that we can talk about in one video and it's one and done. It's actually taking a series of videos because we really have to understand in depth what emotional flashbacks are, what they bring to the table, and not only how they affect us physically, but how they affect us mentally and spiritually. They can affect how we are in relationships. They can affect who we choose to be in relationships with. They can affect how we perform at work. I mean, they can literally manipulate every aspect of your life if we let those control us. And so in these past few videos, and there's probably going to be a few more after this, we want to really hammer down on the emotional flashback, what it looks like, and give you some solid tools in your toolbox to try to mitigate all of the pain and the suffering and the frustration and the confusion and all of these things that come with emotional flashbacks. So today I'm going to give you some examples of personal experience, and I want to dedicate this video to something very common, in particular when it comes to emotional flashbacks, especially with those that have been abused as a child. And we're going to call this video Contempt. And if you look up the word contempt in the Webster's dictionary or in the context of defining it, it's used in several different ways, depending if it's a noun, verb, whatever. But it all kind of comes down to one thing, and it's a look. So we can call contempt the look. And as we go through this video, you'll understand what I'm talking about, especially if you have experienced trauma or abuse in your life. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about and the power that the look has over you. So let's go into this a little bit. When you're a child and, there's parents that they have a look that they give the kid, and the kid knows, okay, that they've had enough, or they mean business, or whatever. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So I don't want to confuse verbal cues or physical cues that we use to keep our kids under control, or to discipline them, or to let them know when they're doing something wrong, or to give them boundaries when it's done in a healthy way. But there is another look that abusive parents give their children, and this is a look of contempt. And so when your parent is looking at you, it's not a look of, hey, you're doing something wrong. This look is literally the look of disgust. It is the look of 1,000 words could be said about how they're looking at you with this contempt. It's a look of disgust. It's a look of hatred. It's a look that is telling you that you are just a worthless human being, that they are just completely and totally disappointed in you, that they wish they just didn't even have you as a child. That's how powerful this look is. I remember getting this look, and it felt like my father was just looking straight through my soul. A lot of times this look gets compounded with another form of punishment. And so what happens is we get conditioned based on this look. So oftentimes with me as a child, when I was looked at that way, I knew that there was going to be another form of abuse coming with that look. It may not have always been a physical thing, but there was absolutely going to be some verbal or emotional abuse. The words were going to fly with that look of contempt. So not only did I get that look, and I'm automatically having a sympathetic nervous system reaction. I'm already in fight or flight. I'm already experiencing anxiety because I know what's coming next. And it's either going to be a extreme verbal, emotional assault, or sometimes if your parent was angry, you could get hit or get hurt. So what happens is we get conditioned to that. And when we see that look, we automatically have a very visceral, a very automatic reaction to the look that puts us in that state of fight or flight. And we are just terrified. And so by conditioning us as a child, this carries on with us into adulthood. And so we need to understand that every time, it could be another kid that you went to school with, or it could be a teacher, or it could be a boss, it could be just anybody out there in public gives you a look like that, it's automatically causing you a reaction, and you're automatically in that state of, fight or flight, freeze or fawn. You're having that 4F trauma reaction based on this look. And so it's important for us to understand the conditioning part of this. It's important for us to understand why we can not necessarily have a threat in front of us, but it still evokes that type of reaction. And it's because of what we call classical conditioning. In basic psychology, we learn the story about Pavlov's dogs, and many of you that don't even practice psychology know this story. And basically, Pavlov would ring a bell every time he fed these dogs, and it got to the point where when he would ring the bell, they would salivate because they conditioned the bell with being fed food. And so their body actually reacted, and they salivated because they felt that food was coming. So, and not the same exact terms, but very similar terms, this is what happens with us. And we are conditioned based on this look, or this look of contempt. And this actually gets us to the point where in life, whether it be, like I said, in the workplace, other people, relationships, anytime that you would get this look or something similar to that look of contempt, we would have a very, very powerful reaction that may not be understandable by the oppressor, because this person may just be giving you a look of disappointment, or a look of, sometimes it could be a look of disgust if you've done something to upset them. But we need to be able to differentiate that this person may not be coming to assault us physically. They may not be getting ready to assault us verbally or emotionally. And so we need to learn the difference between what is a actual threat right in front of us and what is a perceived threat based on the conditioning from being in that abusive household. So what we need to think about today is going back to when we were talking about triggers in the last video. We were talking about, we can call those re-experiencing or whatever we want to call them. We need to realize that these triggers or external things that come into play that cause us to have these reactions, we've talked about how to be able to recognize those. We've talked about how to acknowledge that these are not actually real world scenarios, and we are able to take a step back and realize that we're not in that actual position of danger, that we're not actually in that position of threat that we were as a child when these things happen. Okay. And then we also talked about how we need to differentiate for a reason, because there's going to be times when we need our sympathetic nervous system, and we need our hypervigilance, and we need these things that we've gained over the years to actually get us out of an actual threat. And so it's very important that we learn how to condition our bodies in a different way so that we're able to recognize a real threat versus a perceived threat. And so we're going to go over some coping strategies to do that here in a minute. But I wanted to talk about, some other forms of how we can have these deep emotional flashbacks and what that looks like. And so this week, I've had this, I guess it's my wonderful birthday present for turning 50, is that I developed this prostate infection. And so part of what was happening with that is that there's some bleeding. And so I guess during the night when I was having the frequent urination and such, I would have some bleeding, and it kind of got all over the nice clean sheets of the bed. And so, my spouse, not trying to be any kind of way, just made the comment, whenever you're done bleeding, I can change the sheets. It wasn't meant to be necessarily hostile or bad. But what happened is it actually threw me into an emotional flashback, because when I was a young man, I had attempted suicide by slitting my wrists, and I had bled all over the floor in the kitchen. And all I remember is my dad being very, very angry that he had to replace the floor. And that was the main concern, was, now I have to replace the effing floor. Okay. So they have absolutely nothing to do with each other, but it was that comment that threw me right back into that memory. And it was very painful. And I had to use the very same strategies that I tell you to use in these videos to ground myself and to realize that they're two separate things, that what happened then is in the past and there's nothing I can do about it. And also, what's happening in the present is not that big a deal. So it's important for us to understand and differentiate, because when we get in this reactive state, we could end up being hostile towards the other person. We could get into a defensive posture, and then the other person's kind of like, all I did was make a comment. What the heck is this reaction I'm having right now? And it's because you're not reacting to them and to their comment in the current situation, but you're literally having a very powerful, visceral, emotional reaction and emotional flashback from something that was very painful back many years ago when you were a child. And oftentimes we need to also realize that these are things that we've never processed. Okay, these are things that we remember, but it's just kind of been compartmentalized, and we've kind of shoved it back in our psyche, and it's not one of those things that we've really processed. Okay, and so I had to realize that I never processed the emotions that led me up to doing that attempt. I never processed the emotions that I felt when I gained consciousness and knew I was alive because I was kind of pissed off. Like, I failed. I'm alive. What the hell? And not only was I alive, but here I am getting yelled at my father, which is obviously one of the reasons I did it in the first place. Okay, so never processed that. Never processed the feelings that I had about his comment and his actions. And so that's a lot of moving parts there that never got dealt with. Okay? And so a lot of times that's also how these emotional flashbacks happen, is we need to understand that things are coming back that haven't been processed. So what is the magic bullet here? Okay, there's no magic bullet except for one thing. The one thing is that I knew I need to take a real hard look at the memory. I need to take a real hard look at those feelings that I felt. And I need to realize what the real source of the distress was. And so I talk about this look and this look of contempt because the look was actually the most powerful part of this visceral emotional flashback. It wasn't just the comment about, oh, now I have to replace the effing floor and it's going to cost all this money. It was the look of contempt that I got, okay? And as a young man, I was not able to understand completely what that look meant. Was this a look of contempt because I lived? Like, was this look, was this my parent looking at me like, you idiot, you can't even do that right? I don't know. This is the confusion. This is what goes on in our brain. So in my childhood psyche, it could have been a look of, hey, you're such an idiot, you can't even, successfully take your own life. All you've done is made a big mess and made more problems. Or it could have been a look of contempt that was, simply for the fact that, all you do is cause me problems. All you do is make life difficult for me. Now I have to pay all this money to fix this floor because you're such an idiot. It could have been a look that was deeper than that. It could have been the look that once again made me feel like he wished I was never even born. Okay? So this is a very personal thing. These things are very personal for us. These are very, very deep, meaningful experiences. And so we have to understand that. We tend to make things smaller than they are. We equally catastrophize things sometimes, but we also decatastrophize things or minimize things that actually are a lot more serious. And the point is, at 50 years old, I've got to realize that right now, this very moment when this is happening, that I've got to process those feelings. I've got to go ahead and deal with this and process it and allow myself to feel the emotions that come forward. And the reason I need to do that is because I don't want to have that flashback again. So if that was to happen again, I may have a feeling, I may have a memory, but it's not going to have that intense emotional, physical, and psychological response and reaction from me. So when we ask clients to do the work, when we ask clients to be part of the therapeutic alliance and to do some of these assignments, this is what I'm talking about. We have to do the work, okay? And so you've got to also get to a point, based on the tools in your toolbox that you're gaining, that you realize, number one, I'm strong enough to do this. I'm strong enough to go through this and process this a little bit. It's okay for me to feel the feels, right? Because that's part of the abuse, is that we have been taught that your feelings are not valid, they don't matter, and it's not okay for you to express them. And on top of that, we really were never taught how to properly express emotions. We were taught improper ways to solve problems. We were taught that, I was taught that anger and violence fixes everything, right? But it doesn't. All it does is cause more problems, okay? I wasn't taught the things that I feel now, the tenderness and the compassion and the empathy and all of the things that I feel now, and realizing that that's okay, that it doesn't make me weak. It actually makes me a stronger individual, a more well-rounded individual, okay? And so these are the things, especially as men, that we need to get a handle on. We need to understand that the number one reason that young men take their lives is not trauma or stress or any of those things. It's actually a lack of connection. It's a lack of connection because they feel like they cannot be themselves. They feel like they cannot express themselves or their emotions or their feelings because they were taught wrong. Okay? We're not designed that way. If we're going to say that we were created in God's image, then we need to look at who God is. We need to look at who Jesus was when he walked the earth. He was a man that was empathic. He was a man that was compassionate. He was a man who loved. Okay? He was a man of intelligence. And so if we're created in that image, then we need to understand that God gave us those emotions. He gave us those feelings. He gave us the ability to have those. And that's part of the choice that we make with our free will to love him, is that we're using those emotions that he gave us to make a conscious choice to have a relationship with him. And that's why he created us in the first place. So this curse of abuse, this family curse that continues on, it continues to teach each generation the wrong things. And that's what happens. And this is how this abuse gets conditioned. This is how a simple look of contempt, or what we interpret as a look of contempt, can completely derail us and can completely just knock us off our rockers, so to speak. Okay? So I'm sure that if you are watching this and you have PTSD or CPTSD or even anxiety and depression, that you know what I'm talking about with this look, and you know the feelings that are evoked, that guttural, visceral feeling of fear and terror that comes inside of you. And so I want to give you some coping strategies today on how to minimize this. And the whole key to doing the work and using these techniques, it's not going to cure you the first time that you do it. I'm so sick of all of these gurus that want to sell you something and make you think that you're going to get better just like this. The cold hard truth is you're going to have to work at it, okay? But by working at it, it's just like going to the gym. The more you work out, the stronger you get, the heavier you lift, and the better your body looks. That's just the way it is. They say no pain, no gain. That's exactly how it works. It's going to work the same way by utilizing these techniques. Once you start using them, it becomes routine. It becomes part of your arsenal. It becomes part of your go-to. And those same reflexive thoughts that are negative, that are crushing you and having you go into this spiral of depression and anxiety, these are going to be just the same. They're going to be reflexive thoughts that come to your rescue and help you mitigate those negative and inner critic voices that are trying to destroy us. Okay? And so one of these things that we need to realize, and we've talked about this a little bit before, and I know it sounds trivial, but we have to remind ourselves that we are in an adult body. So when these emotional flashbacks come back and we are terrified and we have this fear, we need to realize, number one, we've done our breathing, we've done our grounding exercises. Now we have to do some cortex work, and we need to remind ourselves, hey, you know, you're almost 6 foot tall and you're 240 pounds, okay? You're pretty safe. Okay? We need to remind ourselves, we're in an adult body. So that terror and that fear that we felt from that oppressive force, we don't have to feel that anymore. Okay? We're not a small child. We're not helpless. We're not small. We're in an adult body. So we're safe. Okay? It's really important. One of the other things that we have to do is that we have to do what's called easing ourselves back into our body. Okay? Fear launches us into this worrying and numbing and even disassociation or spacing out state. And we literally kind of have to learn to come back to ourselves, okay? We need to realize we're in an adult body. This body is safe, and we need to kind of come back in and ease ourselves back into that state. Okay? So, how do we do that? First thing you got to do is you just have to ask yourself to relax. Dr. Eric Gentry, a colleague, has developed this trauma model called forward-facing trauma therapy, and it is all about doing this. It's all about doing progressive muscle relaxation. You know, asking yourself to relax, realizing where the tension is. Is the tension in my neck? Are my arms tight? Are my legs tight? Is my stomach tight? Realizing where that tension is and consciously making an effort to release that tension and asking yourself to relax. Doing your breathing again. I cannot emphasize enough, and I promise you, when somebody told me to do these deep breaths, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous. It reminded me of a woman when she's giving birth and she's doing those breathing exercises. I was like, man, this is ridiculous. But I promise you, doing the breath work is unbelievably beneficial. It absolutely works. Absolutely works. So once again, incorporate that diaphragmatic breathing where you're taking the deep breaths. You're going in through the mouth and out through the nose, and you're hyperoxygenating the blood and you're calming yourself. Okay, so you got to do that. We got to learn to slow down. Okay, one of the ways that we get back into our body and get out of that fight or flight state is we've got to take a second to just slow down. Okay, we just got to be like, okay, I'm here, I'm safe, everything's okay. Let me just slow it down. Okay, and by doing this, we're going to see our pulse rate go down. We're going to see our blood pressure go down. We're going to start seeing that adrenaline and that norepinephrine and that cortisol and all these stress hormones that are pumped through our brains. They're going to start dissipating, and we're going to start making some room for the parasympathetic system to come in and calm us down. Okay, we have to make room for that to happen. Okay, so that we can calm down. Find a safe place. If I'm in an environment where I'm getting this look, whether it's perceived or actual, walk away. Get out of there, okay? Don't sit there in that environment if you can help it. Find a safe place. It doesn't matter what that safe place is. If you've got to walk outside, if you've got to go to the restroom, it doesn't matter. Find a safe place where there is absolutely no stimuli or threat. Do your breathing. Ease yourself back into your body. Slow down for a minute. And then finally, I want you to be able to feel the fear in your body without reacting to it. Okay? And so you're going to get to a point that you realize that fear is literally just a form of energy. It's a form of energy in your body, and your body is primed to do something. Okay? Now, if I've got some dude in my face that's trying to hurt me, then it's time for that energy to release. Okay, so that I can defend myself. But if there is no threat, there is nothing that's there to harm you, then we need to be able to experience that fear and at the same time not be able to react to it. And this is an amazing resiliency tool. Not only does it help us become more resilient and stronger, it also starts helping our brain rewire itself. And we are able now to have much crisper synapses and connections in the brain in regards to what is an actual threat and what is a perceived threat. Okay, so the benefit to this is that not only are we getting more resilient with perceived threats that have been haunting us through emotional flashbacks and causing these reactions, but we are also becoming sharper and safer because we are much more attuned to actual threats. So there is tremendous benefit in this all the way around. It is a win-win. The other thing that I want to go over is I can't finish this video without talking about resisting the inner critic's voice in all of this, because part of that contempt, that look that we're talking about that throws us into this huge emotional flashback, is that we need to understand that that is often accompanied with the inner critic. And the inner critic is nothing more but that internal voice that continues to belittle you and torture you emotionally and psychologically. It is the voice that you heard from that oppressor or from that parent or from that abuser that was always telling you you're stupid, or telling you you're an idiot, or telling you, that they wish you would have never been born. Whatever it is, that's that same voice that continues to live within you because you've been conditioned. And so not only do we have to work on our physical body, calming ourselves down physically and eliminating or mitigating that physical part of the stress reaction, but we have also got to work on quieting and silencing that inner critic. And so one technique is what we're going to call, they call it thought stopping. Okay, and so this inner critic is constantly exaggerating the situation. He's constantly catastrophizing or making this a disastrous thing, and he's wanting you to think that you're in this horrible state of danger and that it's all your fault and that it's uncontrollable. And then he likes to throw in shame and guilt and all of these other things as well. Okay, so thought stopping is you just say no. Okay, it's that simple. You just say no. When that voice says, hey, this is your fault, no. Okay, you're reacting to this the way that you are because you deserve that look of contempt. No, I don't. Okay, that person that's looking at you that way, now they're going to come over here and they're going to hurt you just like your father did. No. It's that simple. We have to stop those thoughts, and it's as simple as just saying no. Just like you would say no to an external person that's speaking to you, you just say no. We stop those thoughts. We refuse to acknowledge them. That's why it's called thought stopping, okay? We can also use thought substitution or thought correction. And so something for you to practice is that I want you to come up with a list of alternative thoughts, an alternative arsenal of weapons. So if the automatic thought is, hey, you're an idiot, then you should have a thought that's already embedded in your brain that's like, no, I'm actually not an idiot. I'm a pretty intelligent person. Okay? So you want to have some thoughts that are memorized, that are at your disposal. I've seen people use flashcards. That's very basic. Before we had internet and all of this fancy stuff, we would use flashcards to study, and that still works. You have a flashcard that counteracts these automatic thoughts that have been happening to you. This is how we can really learn to silence that inner critic, okay? Is it bulletproof? No. Okay, but does it help? Tremendously, yes. And as we hone our skills and we get better at this, you'll notice that we can really not only quiet the inner critic, but you'll notice the impact that it has when we do have an emotional flashback. Because these emotional flashbacks, especially if you have CPTSD, they are going to keep happening. Okay, there's a lot of layers to this onion. Okay, there's a lot of polytrauma. There's a lot of things that have been repressed, especially in childhood, that may come back. And so the object is we become stronger and more resilient. And when these things come, instead of being the helpless, victimized child that is small and is vulnerable and it can be easily destroyed, now we are an adult in an adult body, and now we have weapons to fight back. And that's the whole difference here. It's kind of like playing football with or without the pads on. If you go out there without the pads and the helmet and you get tackled, it's going to hurt a hell of a lot more than if you have your gear on, okay? In spiritual circles, we call it putting on the armor of God, okay? In Ephesians, it's a very thought-provoking and visual scripture that talks about how we have to literally put our armor on every day when we go off into the world, because we're going to be attacked. And so if we start visualizing that and start looking at that scenario, and you start looking at yourself armoring up or preparing for battle or having weapons at your disposal for when these things happen, it's also going to give you some self-esteem and some confidence as well, okay? And all of these things cumulatively will build your healing journey and build you in a more functional, healthy, and happy adult. If this video spoke to you today, if you learned something, even if it was painful for you, please comment, like, share. I thrive off of your feedback. Once again, we're here to help you. If something from my life can be something that helps you, then my job is done and I am fulfilled and my cup is full. That's why I'm here. Until then, be safe, God bless, and we look forward to seeing you next time.